This video contains some graphic and horror content and is not recommended for those who are faint of heart, who have serious health conditions, or are under the age of 14. Viewer discretion is advised. Number 15. Candle Cove. Told through a series of forum posts, Candle Cove began on the horror forums of Icor Falls on March 15, 2009. A person under the name SkyShale033 asks if anyone remembers a children's show called Candle Cove. Several other members soon respond, stating they remember the show and begin to discuss the bizarre plot of what amounts to a rather disturbing television series. The premise was a young girl befriending a group of pirates and the crazy antics they get into. Characters included Pirate Percy, a ragdoll-esque puppet who appears to have bits of other dolls stitched to it, the terrifying Skin Taker, a skeleton who would utter the threat to grind your skin, and Horace Horrible, a monocle-wearing mustache villain and spy for the Skin Taker with a menacing grin. The discussion continues with the writers reminiscing on the more odd and scary moments of the show, even an infamous episode with only screaming for audio and the main character crying. The posts end with a user by the name of Mike Painter 65 remembering how he asked his mother about the show, and she said how she remembered he would go to the TV the same time every week to watch Candle Cove, only for him to be watching static for 20 minutes. A fan video of the screaming episode has appeared online, recreating the surreal episode. Fans of the story wishing to keep the idea alive jokingly commented how the video was just static, hopeful to freak out unsuspecting viewers to no end. Number 14. Robert the Doll. Artist Robert Eugene Otto receives a doll in his childhood between the late 1800s and early 1900s, which he names Robert after himself. However, the doll begins to take on a life of its own and starts terrorizing the Otto family after a servant was suspected of performing black magic on Robert. Apparently, Otto could be heard by his mother talking to Robert, and she would hear Robert respond. Household objects would move around or go missing, and Otto would always say Robert did it when asked by his mother where the objects went. Otto kept Robert into his adulthood and reportedly drove his wife insane. Neighbors would report seeing Robert running around the house when nobody was home. While sounding like a Child's Play inspired story, the true horror in this creepypasta is Robert the Doll actually exists and is on display at the East Martello Museum in Florida. The story of Robert's devilish activities are also highly documented, which is why the story has remained popular. Enthusiasts travel to the museum in order to get a glimpse of Robert, and it has been reported that Robert hates having his picture taken and will blur himself out of pictures with a blinding light even though a person's flash is off. Staff have also said they have found Robert in a different position in the morning than he was in the past evening. Readers of Robert's story are left to decide whether the stories are true or if they are only an early example of creepypasta. A fair warning: Robert the Doll hates skeptics. Number 13. The Portraits. A pure example of the terror creepypastas can provide in a person regardless of the length. Portraits is a short story detailing a hunter lost in the woods coming across a derelict cabin. Upon entering, he finds nobody inside. Night is beginning to fall, so he decides to wait for the occupants to return and explain his story. But hours soon pass and he figures he'll just spend the night there. As he lays down to sleep, he can't help but look up at the portraits all along the walls, staring down at him. He tosses and turns, but can't seem to rid himself of the sight of the haunting portraits, until he finally rolls towards the wall and manages to fall asleep. He is awoken by the morning light and sits up, only to be both puzzled and horrified by the fact there are no portraits on the walls, only windows. Short yet sweet and truly psychological, Portraits plays on a person's fears of becoming lost and alone with darkness approaching. It also has the creepypasta charm of acting quite normal through most of it, and then placing the absolute terror into readers with the last line. Number 12. Squidward's suicide. While no longer possessing the same strength and horror it did when it was written, Squidward's suicide was at a time the most popular creepypasta on the web. In the genre of lost episodes, the story is told through the eyes of a Nickelodeon intern in 2005, and he and his co-workers receive a tape labeled Squidward's suicide. They all decide to watch the film and find a disturbing twist on the beloved SpongeBob SquarePants program. The episode depicts the typically cynical Squidward sitting on a bed while unsettling sounds play in the background. Quick flashes depicting dead children and other macabre scenes appear on screen, and the sounds increase in volume. Squidward now appears to be faded black and his eyes are turning red. At the end of the video, Squidward shoots himself as a strange demonic voice eggs him to do it, and the tape ends. The employees dismiss the tape as a prank, but they check the timestamp and are alarmed to discover it was edited only half a minute before they received the tape. They hand the tape over to authorities, but the investigation quickly turns cold. A video on YouTube has been released depicting the disturbing video, and while rather tame, it is still not for the faint of heart. Number 11, Ted the Caver. Ted and his friends Brad and Joe enjoy exploring caves in their area, and their tale is told through a series of blog posts. Ted explains how he, Brad, and Joe were exploring a cave near their home and came across a very narrow hole they wished to pass through. They drilled a hole large enough for them to fit, but soon things take a bad turn. The group starts hearing disembodied screams and finds strange hieroglyphs on the wall. After exiting the cave, their ordeal only gets worse. The three of them suffer from hallucinations and nightmares of their experiences in the cave. The three men decide to go back to the cave one last time in order to find closure for their psychological trauma, and have opted to bring a gun and knife with them on their last exploration. The blog ends with, "See all of you soon," with a lot of answers. Love, Ted. That was the last anyone heard from Ted, and the blog has not been updated since. The fear behind this story is that of claustrophobia, especially with the amount of photos Ted posts of his experience in the cave itself, showing off the tight passageways they have to cross through. Fear of the dark and becoming trapped are also heavily used, especially since Ted, Brad, and Joe's whereabouts are unknown, and the story is ended ambiguously. Number 10, Quantum Suicide. Less nightmare fuel than in providing a thought experiment which will stay with the reader long after they finish reading the story. A woman becomes tired of her self-perceived mediocrity and decides to end her life. After purchasing a handgun, she writes her family a suicide note and goes off into the woods. She rests at a tree, places the gun in her mouth, and pulls the trigger. However, the hammer falls, but the gun doesn't fire. She tries again and again, but each time results in a misfire, causing her to grow angry. The narrator then details how she read a thought experiment years earlier about the idea a person can obtain immortality via the quantum suicide. They kill an alternate version of themselves instead, leaving them unharmed. With each pull of the trigger, she has killed herself in a parallel reality. 10 days after she left, a search party finally finds her still against the tree, having died of dehydration. The narrator then reveals while the suicide can't kill a person, the rule doesn't take other causes of death into account. Number 9, two-sentence horror stories. A subgenre of creepypasta, two-sentence horror stories are exactly as their title sounds. Horror stories told in 2 lines or less. While some might find this silly, once they begin reading examples, it is easy to understand why they fit in so well to the horror genre and creepypasta world. Many of them are written by internet users and range from bizarre to terrifying to sleeping with the light on tonight. Some examples: by Graboid27, I can't move, breathe, speak, or hear, and it's so dark all the time. If I knew it would be this lonely, I would have been cremated instead. By The Real Hat Man, I woke up to hear knocking on glass. At first I thought it was the window until I heard it come from the mirror again. By Gutseles, there was a picture in my phone of me sleeping. I live alone. By Vault Kid 321, I can't sleep, she whispered, crawling into bed with me. I woke up cold, clutching the dress she was buried in. If any of these pique your interest, it isn't hard to find more with a quick search on the internet. A fair warning, a lot of these are nightmare inducing, and you may wake up in terror with a 2-line story yourself. Number 8, 1999. Similar to Candle Cove, A Canadian man from Calden, Ontario begins posting blog entries talking about a television channel known as Calden Local 21 and details his experiences watching the show Bobby and Mr. Bear's Cellar. Bobby was a man's hand who walked around like a person, and the writer talks about how he only watched a few episodes until one called Playing with Scissors. A hand is seen trapped on the table jerking violently around, while Bobby enters holding scissors and appears to stab the captive hand repeatedly to the point bone is showing. Mr. Bear's Cellar appeared to have a dangled dress as a bear who would interact with children on the show. However, his sinister motives were soon made clear as the episodes progressed, and eventually the broadcasts were shut down by police, though Mr. Bear fled arrest. The man begins to search for the identity of Mr. Bear in hopes of finding justice to the children he murdered and probably molested, and he updates his blog posts every so often. While posts are far and few in between, the entire lore of the story makes it horrifying, playing on the fear of pedophiles and child murder. Number 7. The Keyhole. The enjoyability in this story is its obvious inspiration from gothic horror literature. Keyhole is a short story about a man who checks into a hotel and is advised by the front clerk to under no circumstances peek into or enter the room with no number on it. During the second night of his stay, the man can no longer contain his curiosity and he decides to have a look inside, but the door is locked tight. But he peeks through the keyhole. He is surprised to see a pale woman resting against the wall on the opposite side of the door. The next day, the man once again looks through the keyhole, but only sees a reddish color as if something is blocking the hole. He figures the woman felt she was being spied on and covered the keyhole to prevent this from happening again, and decides to ask the woman at the front desk about it. Upon making his inquiry, the woman sighs with disappointment and asks if he looked through the keyhole, which he confesses to. The woman explains a man murdered his wife in that room and she now haunts it, which is why it is out of bounds. She continues by saying eyewitnesses described the woman as very pale, except for her bloodshot red eyes. Number 6. Reddit No Sleep. A rather bizarre entry to this list, but this subreddit has earned its place here. No Sleep is a forum section on Reddit where Redditors can post their own horror stories for the masses to read and critique. As of January 2016, the subreddit has over 4 million subscribers, and hundreds, possibly thousands of stories are posted every day. Stories vary in content from paranormal experiences to murder to people reconciling memories of their past. The most terrifying thing about the stories is the effort authors put in to create a sense of believability to them, and they are often written to resemble entries seen on Confessions or Let's Not Meet. The all-time top post is called "I'm a search and rescue officer for the US Forest Service. I have some stories to tell" by Search and Rescue Woods, and is not one but a collection of 6 short stories from a man's experience in the field, from finding missing persons, dealing with delusional people, and hints of some sort of spiritual evil being present in the area he works in. It became so popular, a part 2 following the same themes was written. No Sleep certainly deserves its title, as like other creepypastas, it ranges from the bizarre and thought-provoking to the nightmare-fueled bound to keep people up at night. Number 5. Bong Qian Dong Ghost. Taking creepypasta to the next level, Bong Qian Dong Ghost is a webcomic about a young girl walking home in the mid-evening when she encounters a woman walking ahead of her. As the girl gets closer, she notices the woman is amiss, and she is walking with a disfigured leg. As the girl stops to assess what is happening, the reader is taken by surprise when the comic suddenly moves as the woman turns her neck completely around, with the sound of a neck cracking accompanying it. The woman says she is looking for her baby, and the terrified girl points ahead, saying the baby is over there. The woman continues walking as the girl turns to make a quick getaway in the opposite direction. Believing she is safe, she suddenly hears the woman scream behind her, and when she turns, the reader is once again startled by another motion frame of the woman rapidly spider walking towards the girl, and the readers get a full view of the woman's disfigured face. The story ends with the girl explaining how she was found found unconscious by a passerby a few hours later, and how she learned a woman committed suicide in the apartment complex next to the incident by jumping from the top floor after her baby was taken away. The story draws inspiration by J&K horror stories and movies such as Ju-on and Ringu, and plays a psychological game with the reader, with the fear of anticipating a scare more horrifying than the scares themselves. Number 4. Jeff the Killer. Like others on this list, it would not be complete without Jeff the Killer, an early example of creepypasta and playing on the fears of one being defenseless as we sleep. Jeff the Killer is a tragic story of a boy who went to a neighborhood birthday party with his brother. While waiting for the bus, he and his brother are attacked by 3 bullies, but Jeff gets the upper hand and leaves the boys bloodied. Jeff finds an overwhelming satisfaction in hurting them, and he and his brother flee out of fear of getting in trouble. Later at the party, the bullies return and light Jeff on fire, horribly disfiguring him. The bullies confess to the attack and are sent to juvie, but that's not where the story ends. One day, Jeff's mother hears crying from the bathroom, and when she goes to investigate, she finds Jeff carving a permanent smile into his face, having already carved out his eyelids so he could never sleep again. Jeff's mom flees to her room and screams for her husband to wake up, but Jeff is already there saying, "You lied to me, mommy," before killing her and his father. Jeff then kills his brother, whispering, "Go to sleep," while stabbing him. Jeff is never seen again, but the story ends with the familiar warning of Jeff still being out there, waiting to kill his next victim. Number 3. Slenderman. Undoubtedly the most famous icon of creepypasta, the Slenderman is a paranormal figure who is bald, completely white, faceless, and wears a black suit and tie, and appears to transcend time and space with the sole goal of kidnapping children. Afterwards, he would brainwash them to become his proxies and commit acts of kidnapping, assault, and even homicide. The origins of Slenderman appear to be on the Something Awful forum dedicated to making photos paranormal, and were created by Eric Kunsen under the name Victor Surge. Kunsen included fictional quotes from the supposed photographer, which read, quote, "We didn't want to go. We didn't want to kill them, but its persistent silence and outstretched arms horrified and comforted us at the same time." End quote. Kunsen stated he based the Slenderman on a legend he heard about shadow people and the works of H.P. Lovecraft, Zach Parsons, and Stephen King, mainly the novel The Mist. Since the original post, Slenderman has gone beyond viral and has been the subject to a successful game, Slender: The 8 Pages, as well as its sequel, The Arrival, including the highly praised Marble Hornets. Sadly, Slenderman has also been the inspiration for real-life crime, including the attempted murder of a 12-year-old Wisconsin girl by her 2 friends in 2014. Number 2. Normal porn for normal people. An intense story, even for creepypasta standards. Normal porn for normal people is about a chain letter people receive for the title at your website. Many explore the website and find it is not at all what they expected it to be. The site is full of bizarre videos, including a half-hour video of a woman making a peanut butter sandwich, a 5-minute video of an obese man doing mime work, and a 5-minute video of a legless man attempting to break dance. The final video discussed in the story is called useless.avi and runs for 18 minutes. A woman is seen tied to a bed with her mouth taped. After some time, a man in a suit opens the door and releases a shaven chimp into the room. The man leaves the chimp in the room alone with the woman, and the chimp begins brutally maiming the woman and even consumes parts of her body as she screams in agony. While some would dismiss the horror element of this entry as being unrealistic, it should be reminded the existence of various disgusting acts being committed and broadcasted on the deep web, giving normal porn for normal people a slight edge in the believable category. Number 1. The Russian Sleep Experiment. Inspired by the Soviet-American technological race during the Cold War, the story begins in the late 1940s in Soviet Russia. A group of scientists and military personnel are conducting experiments to create a gas which forces people to stay awake for long periods of time. 5 political prisoners are forced into a testing chamber as the gas is poured in, and the scientists listen to the progress through microphones placed around the room. After 9 days, one of the prisoners begins screaming non-stop for 3 hours until his voice is diminished to squeaks. The researchers are surprised of the lack of response from the other subjects, and they would instead whisper into the microphones. After the second prisoner began screaming, the rest covered the portholes with their own feces, and the screaming abruptly stopped. Along with the whispering, after days without any response, the researchers declare the doors will be opened and all the subjects are to lie on the floor or be shot. They receive the response of, "We no longer want to be free." After much debate, the chambers opened on midnight of the 15th day, and it is discovered 4 of the 5 subjects remain alive, but are now grotesque representations of their previous selves, having brutally mutilated themselves and each other. Several of the subjects die soon after being released after they unwillingly fall asleep. The higher command decides to continue the experiment with the 2 surviving subjects, along with several scientists and military personnel. Before the doors are to be closed, one of the scientists produces a handgun and kills the military commander. As the others flee, he points the gun at the surviving subject and demands to know what he is. The subject declares he is what people hide from when they go to sleep. Distraught, the scientist shoots the subject in the head, and his last words are, "So nearly free." Got an idea for a top 15 video? Be sure to submit it at top15s.net/submit. Be sure to subscribe for future videos. Thanks for watching.